What do you do when you finally get to the country you've always wanted to get to and you have an overwhelming longing for what you've left behind? This is our story of being homesick in Portugal.
Being homesick might seem odd, especially when you willingly make the decision to move to a new country and start new somewhere else.
I think one of the reasons we were so homesick in the beginning was because of the language.
They say homesickness is caused by this profound sense of grief for the things and people that are familiar to us and that we've left behind. I was homesick constantly. I think I cried almost every single morning for almost 2 months, and it wasn't because I didn't like Portugal. I liked it a lot, but it was because I was missing something familiar, everything familiar about where I had come from, my family, my friends, my mom. Being here in Portugal for almost 2 years now, we've talked to many expats, and this is a universal feeling, and it's a conflicted feeling. You can still like where you are, but want to go home. So, short of turning around and leaving your new life situation, you have to navigate the waves of homesickness. But how do you cope? It's almost like you're a dory, feeling adrift, untethered, without an anchor.
The thing about being homesick is people experience it in different ways. Marie had the hardest time with it initially. She would literally cry when she woke up. For me, I felt really ready to leave, and I would say I didn't miss that much in Canada, and I didn't feel so homesick. Jack felt really excited for the new adventures that we were going to have, and Henry has had the longest bout of homesickness. He actually still really longs to go back home, even though he's got great friends here and he does lots of fun activities. And we recognized early on that so much of our homesickness was just based on the fact that nothing felt familiar anymore. There were too many things that had changed at once. It was like you woke up and all the pieces on the chessboard were not even in the wrong place, but they were different characters, like G.I. Joes and Pokemon figures.
Homesickness is often triggered by a feeling of being lost or confused while in a new context. And it's a natural response to change, and it's also a testament to how much you love what you left behind. So we knew to get along and to be proactive in this new life of ours, we needed to find ways to cope.
But we definitely found that doing or finding things that reminded you of what you did back home really helps with that feeling of moving forward. For example, we arrived in Portugal in October, and the first time we ever set foot in a mall was in December. People generally go to the mall for distraction, and they're comforted either by buying things or sometimes just being in the shared company of strangers. And I think that was the mall for us. But something about that felt a bit more like home. There was that comfortability of what the mall is. You say mall to someone, and it's going to be pretty similar in a lot of countries. There's big stores on the outside, smaller stores on the inside, huge ceilings, wide walking spaces, very bright. There's a food court, there's a movie theater. It's kind of a universal experience. And this is kind of interesting because in Canada, we didn't go to the mall all that often.
Okay, so we are in now our first official mall in Portugal. It has over 140 stores in here across its multiple buildings. So we're gonna check this out. And now here's some escalators, which is a personal favorite of mine.
What happened?
Escalators are a personal favorite. But this was one of the touch points that was like, yeah, this is familiar to us. And so it helped that we could go there. Now, also, it helped that in the food court, there were a couple of restaurants that we knew. So there was KFC, there was Pizza Hut, there was McDonald's, and most of the other ones were different. And for me, if I go to the mall, my family knows that I'm usually getting Portuguese food, but in those early days, like you go into a McDonald's and you know what you're going to get. It's the same in all these different countries. What was a little bit different is because our kids are gluten-free, and the McDonald's here in Portugal has all of their menu items, all their sandwiches that you could get on a gluten-free bun. And that's something we'll talk about gluten-free in Portugal in another video. But it was really nice that we could actually go there and we knew what to expect. And for a family that has a history of celiac disease, finding gluten-free in something as familiar as a McDonald's was a real coup for us. So as I'm recording this, the light is changing. As you can see, the sun's starting to come in and get in my eyes. So we'll have to see how this progresses the rest of the video. Another thing was going to the cafes. In the cafes, we were in Juda, near the botanical garden in Juda. And there's a tourist spot there, and they have a Starbucks. And so that was really familiar to us because, you know, when you go into a cafe and you don't really know what to order, it's a different experience. But in Starbucks, we could find our big coffee that we were comfortable with, that we were familiar with. Although you will find that Starbucks is significantly more expensive than the coffees in the local cafe. So just a word of warning to the tourists out there.
Learn the language of where you are. Language is the connector, and when you can't communicate, you feel even more isolated and alone. So you mentioned language as a precipitating factor into our homesickness. And again, not so much yours, I guess, because you speak pretty good Portuguese, but I mean, once you got here.
Okay. Honestly, I think it's because of the language. Because even in the beginning, I spoke the most Portuguese, still, by no means was it good or passable. And I read a quote recently, which I thought was really powerful. Loneliness is not the absence of company, it's the absence of connection. And I couldn't really connect with anyone. Outside of you guys, we had no really outward connection. Like, we talked to friends and family back in Canada.
Well, we couldn't connect with anybody. We couldn't read it. We couldn't write it. We certainly couldn't speak it.
Yeah.
And, you know, we always say it was like a wall of sound. Like when we first got here, we could never even tell where the words started and where they ended.
Yes.
And I mean, thankfully, you know, looking back, we can understand it now. We can,
we can
read it.
Yeah.
We can, you know, still speaking for your dad and I is difficult, but certainly so much better.
I know, and for me it's like so much better because I know I can at least be passable through these situations. Like I can order food decently, I can talk to someone decently, I can ask a question, and I can do all these basic things that I couldn't do before with the language.
And for more on how we dealt with loving the new country we're in, but also missing the country we came from, look for part 2 of Homesick in Portugal.